You still treat her like she's 12, Richard Carter said with a grin as he tightened his fingers around my daughter's bruised wrist across the dinner table. Emily flinched so hard her wine glass tipped over and red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. Jesus Christ, Emily, he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Can you do one thing without screwing it up? His wife laughed first, then Daniel. Then even my own grandson looked down at his plate because nobody else knew what to do. I remember staring at my daughter's face while she whispered, "I'm sorry," over and over like she actually believed she'd done something wrong. Then Richard looked at me and smiled. You got awfully quiet there, Harold. Thought prosecutors were supposed to be tough. I looked at his hand crushing my daughter's wrist and said the only thing I could say without losing my temper. Let go of her. He squeezed harder. Or what? That was the moment I realized everybody at that table thought I was just another tired old man they could laugh at. None of them knew I'd spent 32 years putting men like Richard Carter into federal prison. Before I tell you what happened next, I just want to say this. If stories about family, betrayal, and finding the strength to protect the people you love truly resonate with you, maybe take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you feel comfortable, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I always read those comments late at night, and honestly, they remind me the world is bigger than one terrible evening in North Carolina. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 72 years old, and the dinner I'm about to tell you about was the night my family finally stopped pretending everything was fine. It started on a Thursday evening in late October, just outside Charlotte. The air smelled like wet leaves and chimney smoke when I pulled my old Ford into the circular driveway outside Richard Carter's house. The place looked more like a country club than a home. Massive stone columns, 6-car garage, little landscape lights running along the walkway like an airport runway. I sat in my truck for a minute longer than I should have because Emily's phone call earlier that afternoon wouldn't leave my head. You're still coming tonight, right, Dad? She'd asked quietly. Of course I am. Okay, good. There was something strange about the pause before she hung up. My daughter used to talk fast when she was nervous. Ever since she married Daniel Carter 6 years earlier, she talked carefully instead, like every word had to survive inspection before leaving her mouth. I noticed it the second she opened the front door that night. Emily forced a smile and hugged me with one arm instead of two. Hey, Dad. Hey, sweetheart. Up close, she looked exhausted. Her makeup covered most of it, but not completely. The shadows under her eyes were darker than I remembered. You okay? I asked quietly. Yeah, just tired. Then she quickly pulled the sleeve of her sweater lower over her right hand. That was the first time I saw the bruising near her wrist. Not clearly, just enough to know it shouldn't have been there. Before I could ask anything else, Richard's voice boomed from the dining room. Harold, you still alive out there? Everybody laughed when I walked in except Emily. Richard stood near the head of the table with a bourbon glass in his hand. He was one of those men who filled every room on purpose. Loud voice, expensive watch, smile that never reached his eyes. Good to see you, he said while shaking my hand too hard. Thought you retired old prosecutors went to Florida and disappeared. Guess I missed the memo, I replied. He barked. Still got jokes. Dinner started normal enough if you ignored the tension underneath everything. Patricia kept talking about a charity gala. Daniel kept checking his phone under the table. Emily barely touched her food. Every few minutes Richard found some new way to embarrass somebody. Mostly Emily. You still doing those 12-hour hospital shifts? He asked her. That's no way to raise a kid. Dad, we've talked about this, Daniel muttered. No, you've avoided talking about it, Richard shot back. Big difference. Emily lowered her eyes immediately. That bothered me more than anything. Not fear exactly. Habit. Like she already knew resistance would only make things worse. Then came the moment I can't stop replaying in my head. Emily reached across the table to refill Patricia's wine glass, and her sleeve slid back just enough for me to finally see the bruises around her wrist. Finger-shaped bruises. Fresh ones. I felt my stomach drop. And before I could even process what I was looking at, Richard grabbed that same wrist in front of everyone and smiled at me across the dinner table like he was daring me to say something. That's when I noticed something else. Emily didn't look surprised when he did it. She looked ashamed. And somehow, that was the part that scared me most. I did not say another word after Richard grabbed her wrist. I just watched Emily slowly pull her hand back into her lap like she was trying to make herself smaller inside that chair. Patricia immediately started talking again, almost too loudly, like she wanted to erase the moment before anyone acknowledged it happened. Daniel was exactly the same as a child, she said while cutting into her salmon. Clumsy, sensitive, always apologizing for things. Richard chuckled into his bourbon glass. Still does. Daniel forced a laugh, but never looked at his wife. I remember thinking that silence can tell you more about a family than shouting ever will. My daughter used to be loud when she was little. Not rude, just alive. Emily was the kind of kid who filled every room with questions. When she was 8 years old, she once spent 3 straight days trying to rescue a stray cat that kept hiding under our porch in Asheville. She named the thing Pickles before she even touched it. "Dad, hold the flashlight lower," she whispered back then while kneeling in the dirt beside me. "You are scaring him." "I am not scaring him," I told her. "You are holding a tuna sandwich at midnight. That cat thinks you are insane." She laughed so hard she snorted. That laugh disappeared slowly after she married Daniel. Not immediately. That is the part people never understand about these situations. There is never some giant flashing sign at the beginning. It happens inch by inch. Little comments. Little humiliations. Tiny corrections disguised as concern. The first time I noticed it was 4 years earlier during a 4th of July barbecue at Richard's lake house. Emily showed up wearing a red summer dress she loved, and Richard looked her up and down before saying, "That is a little tight for a mother, do you think?" Everybody laughed awkwardly while Emily immediately grabbed a cardigan even though it was 90 degrees outside. Later that evening, I found her standing alone near the dock staring at the water. "You okay?" I asked her. "I am fine, Dad." "You hate that word." "What word?" "Fine." She smiled without looking at me. "Daniel says I take things too personally sometimes." That sentence stayed with me because Emily never used to second-guess herself. Growing up, she was fearless. At 16, she argued with a school principal for suspending another student unfairly. At 23, she worked double shifts through nursing school without complaining once. Then somehow over the years, she became someone who apologized every time another person got angry. I noticed other things too. Daniel deciding what restaurants they went to because Emily was bad at picking. Richard interrupting her constantly during conversations. Patricia correcting harmless details just to embarrass her. One Thanksgiving, Emily brought homemade pecan pie, and Patricia smiled tightly before saying, "Oh honey, next time just buy one. It saves everyone the trouble." Tiny cuts. That is how some families operate. They cut you so often you stop reacting to pain altogether. And the worst part was Daniel slowly becoming a copy of his father. Not fully. Not yet. But enough that I could see it happening. A year earlier, I stopped by their house unexpectedly because Emily had not answered my calls all weekend. Daniel opened the door looking irritated before he forced a smile. "Hey, Harold. Everything okay?" "Of course." Then from somewhere upstairs I heard Emily say quickly, "Dad?" The way she said it bothered me. Relief mixed with panic. When she came downstairs, she was wearing long sleeves even though it was early June. "You sick?" I asked. "No." "What?" "You are sweating." Before she could answer, Daniel cut in. "She is just stressed. She gets emotional when she is overwhelmed." Emotional. I noticed how often he used that word whenever she disagreed with something. Like her feelings were some medical condition everybody else had to manage. Back at the dinner table that night in Charlotte, I watched Emily quietly cleaning spilled wine from the tablecloth while Richard kept talking about business contracts and country club politics. Then Patricia suddenly smiled at me and said, "You know, Harold, Emily has always been fragile, even as a little girl." I looked at my daughter. She kept wiping the same spot over and over. "No," I said carefully. "She was never fragile." For the first time all evening, Richard's smile faded a little. Just for a second. Then he leaned back in his chair and swirled the ice in his bourbon glass. "Funny," he said, "because lately she seems terrified of disappointing everybody." Emily froze completely when he said that. And in that exact moment, I realized someone in that family knew a lot more than they were pretending to. The room went strangely quiet after I said Emily was never fragile. Not tense exactly. Worse than tense. Controlled. Like everybody at that table suddenly became careful about what they said next. Richard took another sip of bourbon and smiled again, but it looked thinner now. "Well," he said casually, "people change." Emily kept staring at the tablecloth. Daniel cleared his throat and reached for his drink. Dad does not mean anything by it, he muttered. Richard immediately looked at him. If I need help speaking, Daniel, I will ask for it. Daniel leaned back in his chair like a scolded teenager instead of a 41-year-old man with a mortgage and a son upstairs playing video games. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Because for years I had done what most fathers do when their grown daughter gets married. I stayed polite. I stayed available. I convinced myself not to interfere. Every time I noticed something wrong, I told myself Emily would come to me if she truly needed help. But sitting there that night, watching three grown adults carefully manage one man's moods at the dinner table, I realized this. Family had spent years training everybody around Richard Carter to stay small. And the worst part was how normal they all acted while doing it. Patricia suddenly stood and started gathering plates. Emily, sweetheart, help me in the kitchen. Emily immediately pushed her chair back. Of course. Richard stopped her before she could stand fully. You forgot to thank your father for the necklace. Emily froze. What? The necklace Daniel bought you. He smiled at me. $2,200. White gold. Not exactly the kind of thing nurses buy themselves. Daniel looked uncomfortable instantly. Emily quietly touched the small necklace around her neck like she had forgotten she was wearing it. Thank you, she whispered to her husband. Richard laughed softly. There she is. Manners matter. I felt heat rise in my chest then. Not because of the necklace. Because I recognized exactly what he was doing. Men like Richard never gave gifts freely. Every dollar came attached to ownership. Every favor created debt. I had seen it for decades in courtrooms. Organized crime bosses did the same thing with cars, apartments, tuition payments. They wrapped control inside generosity until people stopped knowing the difference. Richard suddenly looked at me and grinned. You ever buy your wife jewelry like that, Harold? Sometimes, I answered, without asking for applause afterward. Daniel looked down immediately. Patricia nearly dropped a fork. Emily slowly turned toward me with the smallest look of surprise I had seen on her face all evening. Richard's smile disappeared completely this time. The old version of me would have softened the moment, changed the subject, made some harmless joke so everybody could breathe again. Instead, I just sat there calmly holding eye contact. Richard leaned back slowly in his chair. Well, he said after a moment, guess retirement finally gave you some backbone. Nobody laughed this time. Upstairs, I could hear my grandson, Mason, running across the hallway floor. The sound made Emily smile for half a second before it vanished again. Then Patricia forced a laugh and started talking about a vacation property in Hilton Head like nothing had happened. But I noticed Daniel watching me differently now. Nervously, carefully, like he was trying to figure out whether I knew something. Dinner dragged on another 30 minutes after that. Richard talked about expanding his construction business into South Carolina. Patricia bragged about a charity board she joined. Emily barely spoke at all. Then near the end of the meal, Richard's phone buzzed beside his plate. He glanced down at the screen for less than a second before flipping it over face down immediately. But I caught the expression on his face first. Not annoyance. Panic. Tiny. Fast. Gone almost instantly. Everything okay? Patricia asked. Fine, he snapped too quickly. Then he stood up. Excuse me for a minute. He walked toward his office down the hallway without another word. Daniel watched him leave and rubbed the back of his neck nervously. Emily looked down again. And for reasons I could not fully explain yet, every instinct I had spent 32 years developing suddenly started screaming at me that something inside this house was about to crack open. Richard stayed inside his office longer than necessary. You could feel it. The entire house changed while he was gone. Patricia started stacking dishes that did not need stacking. Daniel checked his phone every 30 seconds without reading anything on the screen. Emily quietly gathered empty glasses from the table like she was trying to disappear into chores. Nobody relaxed. They just waited. I helped Emily carry plates into the kitchen and finally got a moment alone with her near the sink. Sweetheart, I said softly, look at me for a second. She kept rinsing dishes. I am okay, Dad. Emily. She stopped moving then, but still would not meet my eyes. Up close, I could see how tired she really was. Not physically, emotionally tired. The kind that settles into people after years of walking on eggshells. Has he ever hurt you? I asked quietly. Her hands froze under the running water. For a second, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. Instead, she whispered, You do not understand how complicated this is. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Because people only say things. Like that after they have spent a very long time convincing themselves they deserve what is happening to them. Before I could answer, Patricia walked into the kitchen carrying a pie dish. "Everything all right in here?" she asked too quickly. Emily immediately stepped away from me. "Yep, just cleaning up." Patricia smiled at me, but it felt rehearsed. Emily gets overwhelmed sometimes. She has always had anxiety. There it was again. Another explanation. Another excuse neatly prepared ahead of time. I dried my hands slowly and looked at Patricia carefully. "Funny," I said. "I do not remember her having anxiety until she joined this family." Patricia's smile tightened instantly. "That is unfair." "Is it?" For the first time all night, she did not answer immediately. Then she lowered her voice. "Harold, Richard can be intense, but everything he does is for this family." I almost laughed hearing that. I had heard versions of that sentence my entire career. Wives saying it about corrupt husbands. Employees saying it about abusive bosses. Fear always disguises itself as loyalty eventually. From the hallway, I suddenly heard Richard's voice rise sharply inside his office. "No, absolutely not." Silence followed. Then lower voices I could not make out. Daniel immediately looked toward the hallway. His face had gone pale. Emily noticed too. "What is going on?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," Daniel answered way too fast. Richard stepped back into the dining room a few seconds later with a completely different expression on his face. Calm, smiling, controlled. The problem was I had spent decades around criminals who believed they could outsmile consequences. Once you learn to recognize panic behind confidence, you never stop seeing it. "Sorry about that," Richard said cheerfully. "Business never sleeps." He poured himself another bourbon even though his hand shook slightly while lifting the bottle. Daniel noticed it too. "Dad, maybe tonight is not the best," I said it as handled. Daniel immediately shut up again. Then Richard looked directly at Emily. "Actually, sweetheart, why do not you tell your father the good news?" Emily blinked. "What?" "The beach house." She looked confused for half a second before forcing a smile. "Oh, right." Richard leaned against the counter proudly. "Daniel and Emily are moving into the Hilton Head property next spring. Bigger place. Better schools for Mason." I stared at Emily. She looked stunned. "You are moving?" I asked. I did not know it was official yet." Richard laughed loudly. "Come on now. Family decisions cannot wait forever." Something cold settled into my stomach then. Emily was hearing about her own future at the same time I was. Daniel would not even look at her. "Daniel," I asked carefully, "you already agreed to this?" He rubbed his forehead nervously. "Dad thinks it is the best move financially." "Dad thinks," Emily repeated quietly. Richard's smile faded just a little. "Do not start this tonight." Emily looked at him for the first time all evening with actual hurt in her eyes. "You told me we were still discussing it." Nobody spoke. The room became so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking near the staircase. Richard set his glass down hard enough to make Emily flinch. "Everything I do is to protect this family," he said flatly. "Maybe if people appreciated that more, we would not keep having these little emotional scenes." And that was the exact moment I realized my daughter was not just trapped inside this family. She was being managed by it. After that conversation, dinner ended in the strangest way possible. Nobody argued. Nobody yelled. They simply acted like Emily had not just discovered her entire future had been decided without her. Patricia cut slices of pie nobody wanted. Daniel disappeared upstairs supposedly to check on Mason. Richard turned a baseball game on in the living room loud enough to fill the silence. And Emily sat at the kitchen island staring at her untouched coffee like she was trying to remember how she got there. I stayed another hour because leaving immediately would have made things worse for her. Families like this punish honesty faster than cruelty. Around 10:30, I finally grabbed my coat. "I should get on the road," I said quietly. Emily walked me to the front door while the others stayed behind pretending to watch television. The moment we stepped outside into the cold night air, her entire expression changed. The fake smile vanished instantly. "Dad," she whispered, "do not make this bigger than it already is." I looked at her carefully. "You think this is small?" Her eyes filled with tears so fast it startled me. "You do not understand how hard I am trying to keep this family together. A family should not feel like something you survive." She looked away immediately. "Please." That word nearly broke my heart. Not because she said it, because she sounded afraid while saying it. I drove back to Asheville that night with the radio off the entire 4 hours. Around mile marker 142, I finally called her. Straight to voicemail. I waited 20 minutes and called again. Voicemail. The next morning I texted her before sunrise. Just checking in. Love you. No response. By noon I tried Daniel. Hey Harold, he answered quietly. Everything all right? I was about to ask you the same thing. Long pause. Emily is just stressed. Daniel, please do not push this right now. Then he hung up. That bothered me more than yelling would have. People who lie aggressively still care about convincing you. Daniel sounded exhausted. Like he already knew the truth could not survive much longer. Over the next week I tried everything I could think of without completely cornering Emily. I sent flowers to the hospital where she worked. She texted thank you 3 hours later. Nothing else. I mailed Mason a birthday present early, just as an excuse to keep communication open. No reply. I even wrote Emily an actual letter because when she was little she used to save every handwritten note I ever gave her. I kept it simple. You never have to earn love from me. You already have it. 2 days later the envelope came back to my mailbox unopened. Returned to sender. No explanation. I stood in my kitchen holding that letter for a long time. Then things got stranger. One afternoon, an old family friend named Carol Jenkins called me unexpectedly. Harold, she said carefully, I hope you do not mind me asking this, but is everything all right with Emily? My stomach tightened immediately. Why? Silence. Patricia mentioned Emily has been struggling emotionally lately. She said the family has been worried about instability. Instability. That word hit me like ice water. Suddenly, everything started making sense. The excuses. The constant references to anxiety. Emotional scenes. Overwhelmed. They were building a narrative around my daughter piece by piece. And people were believing it because that is what happens when enough voices repeat the same story calmly enough. I called Emily immediately after that conversation. Voicemail again. This time I left a message. Emily, listen to me carefully. Whatever they are telling people, you call me right now. She never called back. 3 days later, I received an email from Patricia. Subject line, concern. The message was polite enough to make my skin crawl. We think some distance might be healthiest for Emily right now. She becomes very emotionally dysregulated after family conflict, and we are trying to create stability for Mason. Dysregulated. Stability. They talked about my daughter like she was a dangerous employee instead of a human being. I stared at that email until nearly midnight. Then I noticed something else. Attached at the bottom was a scanned document from a therapist consultation. Not signed, not official, but detailed enough to suggest Emily suffered from emotional dependency issues connected to childhood attachment patterns. Childhood attachment patterns. They were trying to blame me. I picked up my phone and called Emily again, knowing she probably would not answer. But this time after the 4th ring, somebody finally picked up. There was breathing on the other end. Quiet. Shaking. Emily, I said softly. She whispered only 4 words before the line suddenly disconnected. Dad, they read everything. I did not sleep at all after that phone call. I sat in my kitchen until sunrise staring at my cell phone like it might ring again if I waited long enough. It never did. Around 6 in the morning, I made coffee and noticed my hands shaking while pouring it. Not from fear. From recognition. I had heard that tone before. Quiet voices. Rushed words. People speaking like someone else might be listening. 32 years. Around witnesses, victims, informants, and frightened spouses teaches you something uncomfortable about human beings. People rarely whisper unless they have already learned what happens when they speak normally. By noon, I was driving back toward Charlotte. I did not call first this time. I just drove. The whole trip felt strangely familiar, like my body already knew something my mind was still resisting. Halfway there, I stopped for gas near Statesville and suddenly remembered the last long drive I ever took with my wife before cancer took her. Susan always hated silence in cars. You brood too much, she used to tell me while changing radio stations every 30 seconds. You think everybody is hiding something. Usually she was wrong, but not often. When I finally pulled into Daniel and Emily's neighborhood, I noticed Emily's car was gone. Richard's black Escalade sat in the driveway instead. I knocked anyway. Patricia opened the door, looking genuinely startled to see me. Harold, where is Emily? Her face changed immediately. Too fast. At work. I called the hospital already. Silence. That told me enough. Patricia stepped outside and lowered her voice. You need to stop escalating this. Escalating what? Emily is emotionally exhausted. She needs stability right now. There was that word again. Stability. They used it like a weapon. Did she ask you to say that? I asked. Patricia crossed her arms tightly. You are making things harder for her. No, I said quietly. I think somebody else has been doing that for years. Richard suddenly appeared behind her in the doorway. You really should call before showing up at people's homes, Harold. He looked perfectly calm again. Expensive sweater. Coffee mug in hand. Like the previous week had never happened. Where is my daughter? I asked him directly. With Daniel. Doing what? Trying to fix the damage you caused. I stared at him for a long moment. You know what the difference is between men like you and men like me? His smile returned slowly. Enlighten me. I spent my career listening carefully when people repeated the same words too often. Something flickered in his eyes then. Just briefly. Richard took a sip of coffee and leaned casually against the doorway. You really think this is some conspiracy? I think Emily sounded frightened. Emily is fragile. Stop saying that. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Patricia flinched slightly. Richard did not. You know, he said softly. There is a reason Daniel and Emily have been creating boundaries with you. Boundaries. Another therapy word. Another carefully chosen label designed to make concern sound dangerous. Did Emily tell you that herself? I asked. Neither of them answered immediately. That silence hurt more than anything else so far. Because for the first time I understood what they were actually doing. They were isolating her slowly while making it sound healthy. Turning her support system into a threat. Rewriting reality one polite sentence at a time until even she no longer trusted her own instincts. I drove home again that evening feeling older than I had in years. The house felt painfully empty when I walked inside. Susan's old reading glasses still sat on the bookshelf beside her chair. Her knitting basket remained exactly where she left it 3 years earlier, because I still could not bring myself to move it. I sat there in silence until nearly midnight thinking about all the times she warned me not to ignore my instincts about Richard Carter. That man smiles with his teeth, she told me once after Thanksgiving. Not his eyes. Back then I thought keeping peace mattered more than pushing too hard. Now my daughter barely answered my calls, and my grandson probably thought I had simply disappeared. That was the lowest part. Not anger. Not fear. Helplessness. The feeling that your child is drowning while pretending to everybody else she is learning how to swim. Then at exactly 12:14 in the morning, my laptop made a soft notification sound from the kitchen counter. One new email. No subject line. No message. Just a single attachment from an address I did not recognize. And when I opened the file, I immediately understood Emily had finally found a way to speak. The attachment was a photograph. Nothing else. No message. No explanation. Just a blurry image taken inside what looked like Richard's home office. At first I could not even tell what I was looking at. Then I zoomed in and saw stacks of folders spread across a desk beside an open laptop. One folder had Emily's name written across the tab in thick black marker. Another said custody timeline. My chest went cold reading those two words together. Underneath the photograph was a timestamp from 11:48 that night. Emily had sent it less than 30 minutes before I opened it. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally whispering, Jesus Christ. The next morning I called the only person I trusted with something like this. Marcus Hale answered on the second ring. Harold Bennett, he said. You only call this early when somebody is in trouble. I need a favor. Silence. How bad? I looked back at the photo on my laptop. Bad enough that I am asking you. Marcus and I worked organized crime cases together almost 15 years before he retired from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He lived outside Knoxville now and spent most of his time restoring old motorcycles in a garage behind his house. But there are some people who never really stop being who they were. Send me what you have, he said quietly. And Harold, yeah. Do not do anything emotional. I almost laughed hearing that. At 72, everything hurts too much to be emotional. By noon, Marcus called back. Richard Carter Construction has problems, he said immediately. Tax discrepancies, labor complaints, cash payroll reports that disappeared, couple sealed civil settlements too. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Domestic? Cannot confirm that officially. But there are patterns. Patterns. That word mattered. Courts care about patterns because isolated incidents can be explained away. Patterns tell the truth people try to hide. For the next several days, I stopped chasing Emily directly. That was the hardest decision I made. Every instinct as a father wanted to force my way into the situation and pull her out myself. But another part of me understood something important now. Emily had spent years being controlled by people who decided things for her. If I truly wanted to help her, I could not become another person making choices over her head. So instead, I prepared quietly. I reopened old habits I had not touched in years. Legal notebooks, timelines, archive contacts. I bought a cheap printer from Office Depot because my old one barely worked anymore. I cleared off Susan's sewing table and turned it into a workspace covered with folders and legal pads. Every morning, I made coffee before sunrise and organized details. Dates, calls, emails, contradictions. I stopped feeling helpless once I started building structure around the chaos. That is something nobody tells you about surviving hard things. Action matters more than optimism. One afternoon, Marcus drove in from Tennessee on his Harley and walked into my kitchen carrying a cardboard box full of printed records. "You look terrible," he said. "Good to see you too." He dropped the box on the table. "Your daughter is smarter than they think." Inside were copies of property transfers connected to Richard's company, hidden shell partnerships, quiet settlements, non-disclosure agreements. Marcus pointed at one file near the bottom. "This one matters." It was a consulting agreement signed by Daniel 2 years earlier. Richard technically owned nearly everything Daniel and Emily depended on financially. Their house, insurance, even Mason's private school payments. Dependency disguised as generosity all over again. "He built a cage," I muttered. Marcus nodded slowly. "And cages work best when people think they are too weak to leave them." That night, I did something I had not done in years. I went downstairs into the basement and unlocked an old gray filing cabinet Susan always told me to throw away. Inside were photographs from my career, courtroom sketches, newspaper clippings, federal commendations. 32 years of cases involving men who believed power made them untouchable. I stared at one photo in particular from 1998. 3 smiling businessmen outside a country club in Atlanta. 2 ended up in prison. The 3rd testified against them to save himself. All 3 used the exact same smile Richard Carter wore at dinner. Calm men hiding panic behind confidence. Upstairs, my phone buzzed suddenly across the kitchen counter. Unknown number. 1 new text message. Only 6 words. "He is checking my phone now too." Then another message appeared immediately after. But I found something bigger. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel afraid after reading Emily's message. I felt focused. There is a difference. Fear makes your thoughts scatter. Focus makes everything suddenly become very clear. I replied carefully. "Do not send details yet. Only tell me if you are safe." 3 minutes passed before another message appeared. "Not really." Then nothing else. I sat there staring at the screen while rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. Marcus leaned against the counter drinking stale coffee from one of Susan's old ceramic mugs. "That answer tells you everything," he said quietly. I nodded once. "Yeah." The next morning, I drove downtown for the first time in months wearing a suit I had not touched since retirement. Dark gray, blue tie, Federal Bar Association pin still attached to the lapel because I never bothered removing it. When I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving the house, I barely recognized the man staring back. Not because I looked younger. I did not. But for the first time since Susan died, I looked like myself again. The security guard at the federal courthouse in Asheville looked up from the scanner and blinked twice when he saw me. "Mr. Bennett?" I smiled faintly. "Morning, Carl." He laughed immediately. "Well, I will be damned." Word spreads fast inside old institutions. By the time I reached the 4th floor, 3 former prosecutors had already stepped out of offices to shake my hand. "Harold Bennett in the flesh," one of them joked. "Thought retirement killed you." "Almost did," I answered. People smiled, but I could see something else too. Respect. Real respect. Not the loud performative kind Richard Carter demanded from people around him. Quiet respect earned over decades. That mattered more. Assistant United States Attorney Rebecca Torres met me in her office 30 minutes later. Mid-40s. Sharp eyes. No patience for nonsense. I mentored her briefly almost 20 years earlier when she was fresh out of law school. "You look angry," she said after closing the door. "I am trying very hard not to be." I handed her copies of the financial records Marcus uncovered along with the photograph Emily sent. Rebecca studied everything silently for several minutes. "These shell transfers are ugly," she muttered. "And this consulting structure around the sun?" "Dependency model," I said immediately. Control the finances, and everybody stays trapped. She looked up slowly. This personal for you? I hesitated. Yes. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. Then you need to be careful. Personal cases make smart people reckless. I know. She tapped the photograph with one finger. What exactly are you asking me for here, Harold? I looked at the evidence spread across her desk. Nothing illegal. Nothing special. I just want the right people to notice what has already been happening. Rebecca stared at me another few seconds before finally nodding once. All right. Walking back through the courthouse afterward felt surreal. Old memories everywhere. The smell of burnt coffee near the elevators. Lawyers rushing through hallways carrying overstuffed folders. Marshals joking near the metal detectors. For 32 years this building had been my entire world. I used to spend 14-hour days here preparing racketeering cases against men who believed money protected them from consequences. Men who built entire lives around controlling weaker people. And the truth was, Richard Carter was not special at all. That was the part suddenly becoming clear to me now. He was just smaller than the monsters I used to prosecute. Smaller ego. Smaller operation. Same instincts. Outside the courthouse, I stopped at a food truck and bought coffee from a young guy with sleeve tattoos who looked half asleep. Rough morning? He asked while handing me the cup. I smiled slightly. Actually, I said, first good morning I have had in a while. Around 3 that afternoon my phone rang while I was driving home through Black Mountain. Unknown number again. I answered immediately. Dad. Emily sounded different this time. Still nervous, but steadier somehow. I am here, I said softly. Silence. For a moment. Then she whispered, I found copies of settlement agreements in Richard's office. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What kind of settlements? Women. The word hung there between us. Quiet. Heavy. Real. Then Emily took a shaky breath and said something that told me everything was finally beginning to change. Dad, I do not think I am crazy anymore. 3 days later, Emily asked to meet me in person for the first time since that dinner in Charlotte. She chose a small coffee shop near Lake Norman, just off Interstate 77. Neutral ground. Public enough to feel safe. I arrived 20 minutes early out of habit and sat near the back window where I could see both entrances. Old instincts again. The morning crowd moved quietly around us. Nurses grabbing coffee before shifts. Construction workers in reflective jackets. A young couple arguing softly over directions to Asheville. Normal life continuing while mine felt balanced on the edge of something sharp. Emily walked in wearing dark sunglasses even though it was cloudy outside. The first thing I noticed was how tense she looked scanning the room before spotting me. The second thing I noticed was that she came alone. She sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup without drinking it. Did anyone follow you? I asked quietly. She gave a tired half smile. You sound like you never retired. Occupational hazard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Emily slowly slid a folded envelope across the table toward me. I copied everything I could before Richard noticed files were missing. Inside were photocopies of settlement agreements tied to former employees of Richard's company. Harassment complaints. Workplace intimidation accusations. Confidential payouts. One document mentioned a woman withdrawing testimony after pressure from management. Another referenced undocumented payroll manipulation connected to federal contracting bids. I looked up at Emily carefully. You read all of this? She nodded slowly. At first I thought maybe I was overreacting. Her voice shook slightly. Then I realized every woman in these files sounded exactly like me. That sentence sat between us for a while. Heavy, honest, real. Outside the window, rain started falling lightly across the parking lot. Emily finally removed her sunglasses, and I saw how exhausted she truly was. Not weak, not unstable, awake. There is a difference once you learn to recognize it. Daniel knows I met you today, she said quietly. How did that go? She let out a humorless laugh. He asked if I was having another emotional spiral. I closed my eyes briefly hearing that. And what did you say? Emily stared down into her coffee. I told him I am done apologizing for noticing things. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to pride instead of fear. Small, careful, but real. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the table. Richard's name flashed across the screen. Emily stared at it without answering. You do not have to pick up, I said softly. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she declined the call. Simple movement. Tiny thing really. But I could practically feel the shift happening inside her. 10 seconds later another call came through. This time Daniel. She answered quietly. Hi. I could hear his muffled voice immediately, even from across the table. Fast. Nervous. I am with Dad, Emily said calmly. More talking from his side. Then Emily straightened slightly in her chair. No, Daniel. I am not discussing this in front of your father anymore. Another pause. Because every conversation turns into me defending reality. She hung up before he could answer. I had not seen my daughter end a conversation on her own terms in years. Her hands still trembled afterward, but she did not apologize for it. He is scared, I said quietly. Emily nodded once. Good. We sat there another hour going through documents carefully. Dates, signatures, financial links. Every piece fitting into a larger picture neither Richard nor Daniel realized was forming around them. Around noon my phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca Torres. Federal Contracting Division opened preliminary review this morning. I stared at the screen for a second before showing Emily. She read the message twice silently. So this is real now? She whispered. It always was. Another silence settled. Between us then. But this one felt different from the others. Less trapped. More dangerous. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Sunlight pushed through the clouds over the lake in thin, pale streaks. Emily looked out the window for a long moment before quietly saying, There is one more thing I have not told you yet. I felt my stomach tighten immediately. What is it? She looked directly at me for the first time all morning. Richard already knows somebody talked. Emily barely touched her coffee after saying Richard knew somebody talked. She kept glancing toward the front windows every time headlights passed outside. How does he know? I asked quietly. She rubbed her palms together nervously. Yesterday, he started asking weird questions about files in his office. Then this morning, he asked whether I had been spending more time with you lately. What did you tell him? Nothing. She paused. I do not think he believed me. My phone buzzed then. Rebecca Torres again. Only 3 words this time. Do not wait. I stared at the message for a second before slipping the phone back into my coat pocket. Emily, I said carefully, you and Mason need to leave that house tonight. Her face tightened immediately. I knew you were going to say that. Because you already know I am right. She looked down at the table. If I leave suddenly, Richard will tell everybody I had some kind of breakdown. Let him. You do not understand how connected he is. I almost smiled hearing that. Actually, sweetheart, I understand exactly how men like him operate. She looked at me differently then. Not like a worried daughter. Like she was finally starting to remember who her father used to be before retirement, and grief made him quiet. We left the coffee shop separately, just to be careful. I drove south toward Charlotte, while Emily went back to pick up Mason from school. Around 5:30, my phone rang again. Daniel this time. I answered without speaking. Harold, he said immediately, voice shaking slightly. We need to talk. About what? Long silence. Dad says federal investigators contacted the company today. I kept driving. Interesting. Did you do this? Calm. Stay calm. That mattered. No, Daniel. Richard did this himself over many years. He exhaled hard into the phone. You do not understand what this could do to our family. I think your family has had problems long before investigators showed up. Another silence. Then quietly, almost like a child confessing something, Daniel asked, What exactly do you know? I looked out at the interstate stretching ahead of me. Enough. He hung up immediately after that. No argument. No threats. Just fear. By the time I reached Charlotte, the sky had already gone dark. Emily texted me an address for a small hotel near Concord where she and Mason would stay temporarily. Do not come here yet, she wrote. Richard is at the house. That message alone told me everything about the atmosphere inside that home now. Nobody was pretending anymore. Around 8 that evening, Marcus called while I sat parked outside the hotel. Federal Contracting Division moved faster than expected, he said. Why? Because one of Richard's old settlements involved a subcontractor tied to a state infrastructure bid. I closed my eyes briefly. Bigger than I thought. There is more, Marcus added. Somebody inside the company already started cooperating. Daniel. No. Patricia. That surprised me enough to actually laugh once under my breath. Guess survival instincts finally kicked in. Marcus lowered his voice slightly. Harold, listen carefully. Tomorrow morning, there is going to be a formal visit to Carter Construction. Financial Crimes Unit. Labor investigators. Full process. I stared through the windshield at rain beginning to fall again across the parking lot lights. Emily safe? He asked. For now. Good. Because tomorrow is going to get ugly. 20 minutes later, Emily finally opened the hotel room door for me. Mason was asleep curled under a blanket watching cartoons with the volume low. Emily looked exhausted, but steadier than I had seen her in months. On the small table beside the bed sat 3 packed bags and a folder thick with copied documents. She noticed me looking at them. I took everything I could before leaving. Good. Then she hesitated before quietly asking, Dad, who exactly were you before I was born? I looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. My daughter sitting inside a cheap hotel room after finally walking away from years of manipulation. And for the first time, I realized she genuinely did not know the full answer to that question. I sat down slowly across from her and loosened my tie. Emily, I said quietly, tomorrow your husband's family is going to learn something they should have figured out a long time ago. Then I reached into my coat pocket and placed my old federal credentials on the table between us. The next morning started quietly, which somehow made everything feel more serious. Emily barely slept. I could tell from the way she kept pacing near the hotel window while Mason ate cereal watching cartoons on the edge of the bed. Around 7:30, my phone rang. Rebecca Torres. It is happening now, she said immediately. Financial Crimes Unit entered Carter Construction 15 minutes ago. I looked over at Emily. She stopped pacing the second she saw my expression. Search warrants? I asked. Multiple. Rebecca lowered her voice slightly. Your daughter's documents helped connect payroll irregularities to settlement suppression. Emily sat down slowly after hearing that. Not shocked, just overwhelmed by finally seeing proof that what she lived through was real enough to matter outside that house. Thank you, I told Rebecca quietly. Do not thank me yet, she replied. This is only the beginning. 20 minutes later, Daniel started calling Emily repeatedly. 5 calls in under 3 minutes. She stared at the screen without answering. You decide, I told her calmly. Nobody else. She finally answered on speaker. Daniel sounded completely different from the man I met years earlier. Panicked, breathing hard. Emily, where are you? Safe. Dad says federal agents are tearing through the office. Maybe they found something worth looking at. Silence. Then frustration. You do not understand what is happening. Emily looked at me briefly before answering. No, Daniel. I finally do. Another long pause. Did Harold put you up to this? That question changed something in her face. Instantly. Not anger. Clarity. No, she said quietly. That is the first thing you still do not understand about me. Then she ended the call herself. I do not think she realized how important that moment was. People recovering from years of manipulation rarely wake up brave one morning. Usually it happens in tiny decisions. Tiny acts of ownership over their own voice. By noon, the story had already spread across local business circles in Charlotte. Marcus sent me a newspaper link showing Carter Construction under federal investigation connected to financial misconduct and labor violations. No names yet, but that would change soon enough. Around 1 in the afternoon, Patricia called me directly. First time ever. I stepped outside the hotel room before answering. Harold, she said immediately, voice trembling. This has gone too far. I looked out over the parking lot while cold wind pushed clouds across the sky. Did it? Richard is furious. That sounds like Richard's problem. She inhaled sharply. Families should protect each other. I almost laughed hearing that sentence now. You protected him, I said calmly. There is a difference. Silence filled the line. Then quieter this time, almost defeated, Patricia whispered, I did not think it would become this. For a second I actually believed her. Fear changes people slowly too. Where is Emily? She asked carefully. Somewhere safe. Richard wants to talk to her. No, my answer came instantly. Firm. Final. Another silence followed. Then Patricia asked the question I think she had been avoiding for years. Who exactly are you, Harold? I looked down at my old federal credentials still sitting in my coat pocket from the night before. I am somebody who spent 32 years watching powerful men mistake silence for weakness. She did not answer after that. She just quietly hung up. Later that evening, Daniel showed up unexpectedly at the hotel alone. No Richard. No Patricia. Just Daniel standing outside under the flickering parking lot lights looking exhausted and older somehow. Emily froze when she saw him through the window. You do not have to talk to him, I said softly. But after a long pause, she nodded once. I do. We stepped outside together. Daniel looked at me first, nervous now in a way I had never seen before. I know who you are, he said quietly. I looked you up this morning. And Daniel swallowed hard. Dad had no idea. That was his mistake. Emily crossed her arms against the cold. Why are you here? Daniel looked at her with genuine panic in his eyes. Because everything is collapsing. Emily stared at him for several seconds before answering softly. No, Daniel. Everything was collapsing long before today. He looked like he wanted to argue but could not find the words anymore. Then finally, he whispered something neither of us expected. Mom gave investigators more documents this afternoon. Emily blinked in shock. What documents? Daniel looked away toward the dark parking lot before answering. The ones Dad kept hidden from everybody, including me. The strangest part about everything that happened afterward was how quiet life became once nobody was pretending anymore. 3 months after the investigation started, Richard Carter resigned from every board he sat on. Carter Construction lost 2 major state contracts within 6 weeks. Several former employees came forward after the federal inquiry became public, and the carefully polished version of Richard's reputation began falling apart piece by piece in full daylight. No dramatic collapse. No screaming courtroom scene. Just truth finally staying in the room long enough that nobody could push it back into the dark again. Daniel moved into a small apartment outside Charlotte after Emily officially filed for divorce. The first few conversations between them were tense and awkward, but over time something in him seemed to crack open too. One afternoon, he met me at a diner near Salisbury to sign paperwork related to Mason's school transfer. He looked exhausted sitting across from me in a wrinkled blue button-down shirt. I used to think keeping the peace made me a good husband, he admitted quietly while stirring cold coffee he never drank. I nodded slowly. A lot of people confuse silence with kindness. He stared down at the table for a long moment before whispering, I should have protected her. For once, I did not rescue him from the weight of that sentence. Some truths are supposed to hurt a little. Emily and Mason moved back to Asheville that spring. Not into my house. That mattered to her. She rented a small 2-bedroom place near Beaver Lake with a tiny porch covered in flower pots and wind chimes that rattled softly every time mountain air rolled through the trees. The first time I visited, she opened the front door smiling in a way I had not seen in years. Not forced. Not careful. Real. Mason ran through the hallway wearing socks too big for his feet, yelling, Grandpa, Mom lets me make pancakes now. Emily laughed from the kitchen and said, He burned 3 already. 4, Mason corrected proudly. The sound of that laughter filled something inside me I thought grief had permanently hollowed out. Healing does not usually arrive all at once. It comes back in small, ordinary moments people almost forget to notice. A quiet kitchen. Safe silence. The ability to breathe normally inside your own home. One evening near the end of summer, Emily and I sat together on her porch watching rain move across the mountains while Mason slept inside. Do you know the worst part? She asked softly. For years I thought if I just explained myself better, everything would finally calm down. I looked out toward the dark tree line, swaying gently in the wind. Some people build their power around keeping others confused. Once you understand that, you stop trying to earn peace from them. She nodded slowly like somebody finally translating a language she had spent years struggling to understand alone. I still feel angry sometimes, she admitted. That is normal. I also feel embarrassed for missing it. I shook my head immediately. No, you survived it. There is a difference. She looked at me quietly after that. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand once. Simple, steady, present. If somebody listening to this story right now is living inside something similar, I want you to hear me carefully. Control does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives smiling. Sometimes it calls itself protection. Sometimes it slowly teaches you to distrust your own instincts until you forget your voice belongs to you too. Please do not ignore the quiet part inside yourself that keeps whispering something is wrong. God gave people instincts for a reason. You are not difficult for wanting respect. You are not unstable for noticing patterns. And you do not owe your silence to anyone just because they helped pay your bills, shared your last name, or convinced the world they were a good person. Protect your financial independence. Protect your friendships. Protect the version of yourself that still recognizes truth before fear talks you out of it. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 72 years old, and the biggest lesson this experience taught me is this. The people who truly love you will never require you to disappear in order to keep the peace. These days, my old federal credentials stay locked back inside the basement filing cabinet where they belong. But every Saturday morning, Mason and I still go fishing together at Lake Junaluska. Last week, he caught a tiny bluegill barely bigger than my hand and held it up like he had discovered buried treasure. Emily stood on the dock laughing while sunlight hit the water behind her, and for the first time in years, nobody looked afraid. Before we packed up to leave, Mason pointed at my old tackle box covered in faded scratches and asked, "Grandpa, why do you keep broken things?" I looked at the box for a second before answering. Because some things survive more than people expect. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening all the way to the end of this story. Truly, I think a lot more people are carrying invisible pain than the world realizes, and sometimes hearing somebody else survive theirs helps us carry our own a little differently. So wherever you are tonight, I hope you remember this. Peace is not something you beg powerful people to give you. Real peace begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself just to keep other people comfortable. And if this story stayed with you in some small way, maybe leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. I read more of those messages than you would probably believe. And if you want to hear more stories about families, hidden truths, second chances, and the quiet moments that change people forever, there are more waiting for you in the playlist right here on this channel. Some of them will make you angry. Some will break your heart a little. But a few might remind you that even after betrayal, people are still capable of rebuilding a life that feels honest again. Sometimes the next story finds you exactly when you need it most.